When the Founding Fathers wrote the Bill of Rights, they knew a free press was essential to keep power in check and the public informed. Well, American society is now in peril because just 6 corporations currently control everything we see and read in the mainstream. But luckily, there are watchdog grassroots media groups picking up the slack and filling in the gaps. Project Censored is the largest media research organization in the country that publishes the top 25 censored stories from the corporate press into a book every year. And to talk to us about media censorship, some of the most underreported stories from the book this year, joining me now from Bodega Bay, the former director of Project Censored and president of the Media Freedom Foundation, Dr. Peter Phillips. Peter, thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Abby. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Peter. So, Peter, I think when a lot of people hear about censorship in the corporate media, they don't understand the extent of what censorship really entails. They think it just means blacking out the story. Talk a little bit about the other elements of censorship that you guys cover with Project Censored.
Well, we look at important news stories that haven't been covered by the corporate media. That's one of the primary goals that we've been doing for the past 36 years. And I want to add one correction here. I don't know if it's fair to say they're the largest media organization doing this kind of work, but I think we're pretty unique. And we have hundreds of faculty members at 20 universities, hundreds of students that are engaged in doing this research. So in some ways, we are very large, but the actual organization itself is somewhat small. But that's the importance of it. We're not dependent upon corporate funding or foundation funding. We're doing what we can do, so we can address any issues that the corporate media is failing to cover, and there's a whole lot. That's certainly understood. If we look at the global media today, the corporate media in the world, they are closely tied in with what we're now calling the 1%, the transnational corporate class of the world. And that media, their goal is to protect their capital, to protect the trillions of dollars of wealth that are concentrated in the 1%, or even the 1,000th of 1% of the global richest people.
And you mentioned, there's other elements like there's backpaging, there's distortion. It's not just a story that literally wasn't covered by the corporate press. It's the way that they frame it. And you mentioned the transnational 1%. You just did an extensive study on, we hear in light of the Occupy Wall Street movement, kind of this faceless, nameless entity, the 0.01% or the 1%. You actually just kind of dovetailed in there and named the names. Talk a little bit about your study, the extensive study about the transnational 1%, the corporate class, Peter, from this year's book. This
study, the Exposing the 1%, is being published in the Censored 2013 book. It's chapter 6. We did quite a bit of research last winter to develop this, and we looked at the top banks in the world and who's running those banks and their involvement in protecting. Now we know it's somewhere between 20 and 30 trillion dollars worth of wealth that's hidden in bank accounts all over the world that's invested, but there's no taxes being paid on it. So the richest people are protecting these huge assets, while on a daily basis between 30 and 40,000 people in the world die from starvation or diseases that could easily be cured. So we have this massive inequity of wealth and power concentrated in a very small number of people that are being served by corporate media. In other words, they are giving messages and propaganda out that protects this concentration of wealth and encourages the continuation of this whole phenomenon.
And they definitely do work hand in hand, Peter, in order to maintain their control with the media. I wanted to just briefly mention a couple stories from the book because they really caught my eye, and I think they would interest a lot of other people. Monsanto. Here's Monsanto. It seems like every day I'm reading more about them. Trying to benefit off Haiti's earthquake. Tell us about that story.
Well, after the earthquake, Monsanto donated 60 tons of corn and vegetable hybrid seeds. Now, these seeds they're genetically modified seeds, and as the Haitian farmers found out about it, 10,000 of them demonstrated, and they wanted the seeds destroyed. Monsanto was trying to introduce genetically modified seeds into the biosphere of Haiti. And they did this under the guise of sending food for the earthquake. It was pretty insidious, and the people found out about it, and they're trying to prevent GMO seeds from coming into the country.
It is amazing when people hear about, in very poor countries, people actually burning or protesting food and seeds. And it is very interesting, and I had no idea that about Monsanto trying to profit. I'm not surprised, though. I wanted to go into Lyme disease, Peter. It's an emerging epidemic. A lot of people I know have been diagnosed with Lyme's, but as your book covers, Lyme's is growing exponentially. The new cases of Lyme disease occur each year at a rate 10 times higher than that of AIDS and the West Nile virus combined. So what's the underreported aspect of this story, Peter?
The underreported aspect is we just don't know how extensive Lyme disease is. The disease originates from a bacteria transmitted through a bite of a tick. But it can remain hidden, so people can have a positive reaction and a negative. It's treated with antibiotics, but usually it takes months and months of treatment in order to really neutralize it. What's happening is that insurance companies are refusing to cover long-term treatment, and it's not allowed, and people would have to pay for this themselves. And there's a mix in the medical community. Their doctors have mixed feelings about it, whether or not this is really there, to what extent, whether one round of antibiotics will cover it. But increasingly, we're becoming aware that this is a deep epidemic inside the world population.
And a lot of misdiagnoses for Lyme's and a lot of the cause of a lot of other things that people haven't related it to before. Peter, just in terms of the general media landscape here, I think a lot of people, when they look at things that Project Censored covers and they're like, well, no, I remember seeing that, or here it is in the New York Times. And like we said before, it's not just not covering it, it's the way that it's covered, the magnitude in which it's covered. But talk about the people, once again, this transnational corporate class, the media ownership, the boards of directors. I mean, when people look at the media establishment, and they say, how could we be not being told about certain things? I mean, all these people, what are they in cahoots with each other? Talk a little bit about, I know that you've done a study on this before, but just how many people this boils down to.
Well, if you look at the top major corporate media groups, they'll have a board of directors from 12 to 20 people. And those people, in turn, will be sitting on the boards of directors of some of the largest banks, military providing companies. They will be sitting on oil companies, and they become part of this global class of the wealthy, and they're hiring the managers inside the corporate media who basically are following the directions and know which side of the bread it's buttered on, and will not be doing stories that expose the powerful.
Yeah, like GM and Fukushima, and how we didn't hear the devastating reality of the real Fukushima crisis. GM owns General Electric. General Electric owns MSNBC, NBC, and of course the Fukushima reactors as well. Peter, how do we take the media back? I know that Mickey has written about Mickey, the current director of Project Censored, has written about the media reform movement. I'm kind of waiting around for the media to reform itself. But really, I mean, it's entrenched in such a corrupt system tied to all these industries, so embedded with kind of the lies and deceit and the establishment line, and also the profiting off this information and the censorship, Peter. So how do we change the system? How do we take back the media for the people, by the people, like it was truly intended?
Well, we have to realize first that corporate media is managed news. It's managed on behalf of the global 1%. That's propaganda. It's top-down propaganda. So the news story of this morning is Hugo Chavez won by 54% of the vote. And yet still, the way the media spins it is always going to continue his agenda of socialism and repression. So it's just complete misinformation. They can't deny that that Hugo Chavez is one of the most popular leaders in the world. He continues to win elections, but he's helping the lower income and the poor in Venezuela by sharing the wealth, the oil wealth, from that country. It's an amazing story, but it's one that the corporate media does not want the American people to know. They want to. He's been denigrated more than any other elected leader in the world. So when we talk about bringing back media to ourselves, we are the media. We have to be our own media. RTV is a good example of that. But Project Censored is looking at all the independent sources of news, and our website, which is www.projectcensored.org, is a place to go and find resources for independent news on literally any topic in the world.
Yeah, and I love the amount of people that you guys have pulled in. I thought it was the largest research organization because, like you said, I mean, there's literally hundreds of people and students all around the world submitting stories, doing the research, and that's what's so beautiful about it is it's just a giant research pool of data and help and really just the passion, Peter, right from the ground up, the grassroots, just as it should be, without that influence from the top. But Peter, really quickly to wrap it up, I just wanted you to briefly talk about the fair share of the common heritage. You just mentioned socialism and kind of the demonization from the establishment on Chavez, Venezuela. Talk a little bit about just what the fair share of the the fair share of the common heritage is and how people can get involved in that.
The fair share of the common heritage is the belief and the philosophy that all the natural resources in the world, the oil and the gas and the air and the fish in the sea, belong to all living things. In other words, they're part of our natural heritage in the world. So if these are privatized, these are taken over by corporations, and that's how wealth is accumulated. An oil company will drill for oil. They'll pay literally nothing for it, sell at high prices, make millions and millions of dollars at our expense, at all of our expense. So when we talk about the fair share of the common heritage, we're talking about allowing the sharing of the wealth of the world to be evenly shared with all living things, all human beings.
Indeed, and we will definitely get you on to talk more about that. I just wanted to give people a brief introduction. Peter Phillips, thank you so much for coming on, President of the Media Freedom Foundation. Top-down corporate control of America's current media system undermines society. It stifles the discourse crucial to maintaining an informed public. The mainstream media establishment has conceded its journalistic integrity time and time again by catering to corporate and political interests. Look, the people can no longer wait on Congress and the FCC to eke out minuscule reforms to the dysfunctional system in which they are embedded. Instead, the people must create alternative methods to communicate and exchange information. It's up to us and it's up to you. If you want to make the corporate media irrelevant, it's time to take back the media. It's time to become the media.